Hello everyone, and welcome back. After using our incredible skills to command the Soviet army to victory, we're jumping into the time machine and heading back to the start of World War III to see how things would have played out if we had sided with the liberty and freedom-loving Allies instead. Can you beat Command & Conquer Red Alert 3, Infantry Only, Allies Edition? If you haven't seen the first vid, here's the rules. Number 1, we can only make or use units from the barracks building. The same exceptions apply as last time, but I'm adding one more to this run, that being dolphins. These are an aquatic unit only trainable through a seaport and thus usually wouldn't be allowed. However, if dogs and bears can count as infantry for the purposes of this run, I see no reason why dolphins shouldn't. Oh sure, Google claims that infantry is defined as a soldier fighting on foot, a body part that dolphins don't have. Oh yeah, liberal? Well, explain this. Yeah, moving on. Number 2, if we're given a non-infantry unit to complete an objective with, we can use it, but only until we get access to an infantry unit to replace it with, at which point the unit must be destroyed. Number 3, this isn't any difficulty challenge. Just like with my last run, I'll try and beat the campaign on hard, but I'll drop it back down if things get a bit too impossible. While we were able to beat the Soviets campaign under these rules, the Allies is a little harder, and I can already foresee a few missions that might prove insurmountable for us. But we won't know until we give it a go, so let's find out. Can you beat Red Alert 3, Infantry Only? We start off joining the Allies in their darkest time. They've been forced to retreat from Western Europe by the Soviets, and now Great Britain alone stands against the Red Wave. We meet Field Marshal Bingham, the Allied Chief Commander, who informs us that while all the other senior commanders are off fighting in Europe, the defense of Britain is being left to us. Things aren't all bad though, as we meet the new US President Ackerman, who intends on supporting us. As if Europe falls, it's the US next. With that, we're sent off to Brighton to fend off the Soviet invasion force. We start this mission off with a small team of peacekeepers. These are the Allies' most basic anti-infantry infantry. We also get 2 attack dogs, which are just a reskin of the Soviets' war bears. They can sniff out disguised enemies, bark to stun infantry, it's literally just a copy-paste job, and as such, just like with the war bears, we won't be really using these 2 all for much. First up, we need to make our way around, taking out small groups of enemies to save some more troops. Use your dogs to stun them, as with our forces so minimal right now, we really don't want to risk our peacekeepers. Once we take out the conscripts around this MCV, we'll get a small base to work with, and are introduced to our first Allied co-commander, the aggressively British Giles. Now, it's just a waiting game for the next Soviet attack. Start pumping out more peacekeepers from the barracks and have them garrison the buildings indicated by the bonus objective. Also, train up a few engineers. These guys are different to the Soviets' engineers, but for the purposes of this run, these guys act exactly the same, being able to take over abandoned or enemy buildings for a bunch of different effects. Send them down to capture the hospital at the end of this pier to complete that bonus objective, and if you have time, send a couple to take over the big guns along the beach. After 2 minutes, the next Soviet wave will airdrop in. Despite the game clearly leading you to believe that garrisoning those buildings is the best way to fend off this attack, your units in the buildings are extremely vulnerable to the conscripts' Molotovs, so it's probably a good idea to keep some of your forces outside of these. After we fend off the attack, the Soviet General Krukov contacts us to tell us that they aren't finished yet. We now get access to Javelin soldiers, who act very similarly to the flak troopers of the Soviets campaign. They're armed with a missile launcher that can shred anything armoured, even aircraft, and can switch to a targeted mode that takes much longer to fire, but does make them have an increased rate of fire once they've locked on. Pump out as many of these guys as you can and send them down to the beach. We're also given a bonus objective to capture those big guns that I mentioned earlier, so if you haven't already finished taking those, do so now. You can get your co-commander to capture 2 of them, but it's probably just faster to do it yourself. These will help fending off the next Soviet attack, which includes some heavy armour. Once this attack is dealt with, we're given a little bit more time to prepare for the final and biggest Soviet push. We get another bonus objective to make a garage and build some vehicles for the next wave, but I'll give you 3 guesses as to why we can't do that, so instead just mass produce some more javelins. While I waited for the next wave, I moved most of my javelins down the pier with all of the roller coasters. When the last wave comes, it's a massive force of these Kirov airships, which our army of javelins can absolutely shred to pieces. Just follow them around, taking them out one by one, and eventually General Krukov will call them off. He claims that his army is needed elsewhere, but we all know the truth. Guys all talk and no walk. With that, it's mission complete. We're congratulated for our victory by General Bingham. Even President Jonah Jameson seems to be impressed by our skills, recommending us for a mission to take back France from the commies, and even lends us their top American commando, Tanya, to help out. We have 2 objectives in this mission, to destroy the Soviet Navy and to free the Allied leaders who have been trapped here. We only have access to 2 unit types to begin with, the Commando Tanya and the Spy. Tanya can absolutely shred infantry, as well as being able to infiltrate and blow up buildings and vehicles. Spies are probably the Allies' most unique unit. They aren't armed, but can disguise themselves as enemy infantry, allowing them to get behind enemy lines to infiltrate their critical infrastructure. These disguises can be broken though if they get too close to certain enemies, like Soviet warbears or the Empire's burst drones, so you have to baby them around a bit so they don't get caught. We need to use these spies to sabotage the naval ports on the island down here, so get them disguised and send them over with Tanya as a bodyguard. Get one of your spies to infiltrate one of the power plants, which will temporarily power down the defenses, giving Tanya a chance to sneak past and cause havoc. I destroyed the Tesla coils around the island, but in hindsight, I'd recommend leaving them and just using Tanya to blow up the generators to bring down the power grid, which will shut off all the defenses anyway. Use Tanya to clear a path to the naval port, and once it's safe, bring a spy in to capture it, and then rinse and repeat for the remaining ports. You'll need to make some more spies since we only start off with 3 and there are 4 ports, plus any generators that you need to infiltrate. You can also use Tanya's special ability to jump a few seconds back in time if your health gets a bit low. Once the last port is captured, we need to get Tanya into the Port Authority building to call the fleet into our trap. With that done, we have to clean up the last of the Soviets' dreadnoughts, so swim Tanya over to blow them away. While we're busy doing that, my co-commander for this mission, Warren, actually managed to secure the Allied leaders on his own, so all that's left for us to do is to destroy the Soviets' base. I thought I'd try to just use Tanya to take out their base, and she actually managed to do some pretty serious damage all on her own, but once she finally met her end, I made a bit of an overkill army and swept them through to finish off the mission. For our next mission, thanks to some very ethically sourced information by Tanya, we'll be taking on the Soviets' headquarters in Germany, pushing them out of Western Europe. We first need to escort an MCV upriver to start building a base, and well, this is kind of a problem. We start the mission with a group of hydrofoils, which are anti-aircraft boats, emphasis on the boats part. I thought I could just let our MCVs continue upriver and hope that they tanked whatever damage came their way, but nope, apparently they have survival instincts or something and won't move until the path is clear of these twin blade choppers. In my last run, whenever I started a mission only with access to vehicles, I would just kick back and force my co-commander to do all the work, but for some reason our co-commander for this mission, the lovely Lisette, doesn't show up until these choppers are destroyed. So yeah, we have no option but to use the hydrofoils to take out the twin blades. This is technically allowed in the rules since I don't have access to any other units yet, but I don't know if I'm okay with that. When I wrote that rule back in the Soviet run, I thought it sounded fair, but after actually having to rely on it, it does feel a little bit like this should invalidate the run. For now though, let's just move on as if nothing happened. Further up the river there's a pair of Tesla foils which we need our co-commander to destroy since our hydrofoils can't target them. So that our dolphins don't get zapped, we can switch our hydrofoils to a weapon jammer mode that makes destroying these a lot safer. With that, our MCVs make land and set up, and some infantry disembarks from the transports that were with us. I immediately used friendly fire commands to have my soldiers destroy the transports and then got started making base and pumping out javelins and peacekeepers. I also made sure to build lots of multi-gunner turrets for base defense. These are the Allies' main type of defenses, and they're pretty cool. You can garrison them with different infantry to completely change what type of defenses they are. For the purposes of this mission, I garrison them with javelins, which basically just turns them into an upgraded version of what they already were. With a small force now amassed, I decided to move in to start taking out the massive Soviet base. This is the first mission where playing with infantry only actually improved my experience over my usual strategy. This mission gives us access to Vindicator bombers, and while these aren't as good as the Soviets' twin blades, with enough of these, air strats are pretty much uncounterable. Without these, we're forced to look at this mission from the ground, and because of that, I noticed a lot more about it. Like, I never noticed before how the Soviets' base here is basically a bunch of mini-bases, all segmented off from each other that we have to chip away at slowly. Focus your forces on attacking the base from the east and use your co-commander to eat away at them from the west. I was going to meet my army with theirs in the middle to deal the final blow to the base, but my co-commander managed to handle it all on her own. With that done, we have to take out the Soviets' headquarters. Luckily, since I hadn't helped destroy the last bit of the base, my army was already ready to go. The path to the HQ is guarded by some pretty heavy armor, but since these tanks are meant to be anti-vehicle, they do barely any damage to our infantry, which doesn't really make sense, but it does make the final push to destroy the headquarters a breeze. This mission was pretty easy, but honestly, it was probably the most fun I've had in this challenge so far. Our victory over the Reds is short-lived, as a much greater threat, the Japanese Empire of the Rising Sun has emerged, threatening the world with a broadcast saying that... What? Due to the threat that this poses, it's been decided that us and the Soviets should put our differences aside and work together to defeat the Empire. President Cave Johnson doesn't agree with this choice though, and makes a very convincing argument against our alliance.
We hate everything we stand for. Freedom, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, apple pie. Did I say freedom? Well, it's worth saying again.
Despite that sound reasoning, our mission to free Gibraltar from the Empire with the Reds goes ahead. This one is pretty cool. Instead of just a regular Allied co-commander, we get paired up with Nikolai and get to actually see Allied and Soviet units interacting. The mission starts with us only having Tanya, and Nikolai in control of Natasha, as they bicker about who's the better commando, which I hate to say it Tanya, Natasha's got you beat. Her superior range, being able to take out enemies way before they even know she's there, just makes her so much more survivable. That being the case, you'll want to mostly rely on Natasha for this mission, as if Tanya dies, it's an automatic failure. You can still get Tanya into fights, but if she starts to take too much damage, make sure to use her time belt to heal her back up. You can also take advantage of the health boxes that you find around the map. On our way to destroy the air hangar, you'll get a bonus objective to destroy a King Oni further up the mountain, which you might as well handle now since it's pretty easy and doesn't take very long. Once at the hangar, target the landed planes out front to cause a chain reaction, blowing up the hangars along with them. We now get to build a base, which I kept pretty simple. 2 ore refineries, a barracks and some defences, and enough power plants to run it all. Once your barracks is built, start mass producing javelins and a few peacekeepers. The game gives us a few cryocopters for this mission, which don't really have any weapons, but are equipped with an ice ray that can freeze enemies in place, which is only really useful in one mission, so IMO, these things aren't really a loss at all to have to destroy. For our next objective, the Empire's captured some of our assault destroyers, these amphibious tanks that can do some serious damage, so we have to get them back. I thought I could pull a stealth mission with Tanya to destroy the base and free them, but she died pretty quickly, so I just got my co-commander to handle destroying the base defenses trapping these things. Bet Natasha could have taken that base on her own. Obviously, we can't use these things, so just send them up to our base to have them destroyed. Ironically, they were actually safer in the Empire's hands. Our next objective is to destroy the Empire's base. You probably have a pretty good army built up by this point, but I wouldn't send them in just yet. Instead, make another Tanya and place her at the back of Nikolai's base, then continue bulking up your forces. Now, it's just a waiting game. Eventually, the Empire will get some reinforcements and will try to set up a counter base behind our co-commander. On my first attempt, this was able to completely overwhelm my co-commander, and then they were able to bombard my base from the water where my soldiers had no hope of reaching them. That's why I said put Tanya at the back here. With her there, she can easily infiltrate the buildings and ships before they get a chance to set up, and even if she is taken out, our co-commander should be able to handle the last of them. With that attack fended off, now send your amassed army over to take the Empire's base. I was pretty careless with my first push, which led to my army being taken out, but I was able to do some good damage to the generators to knock out the power, making my second wave much more effective, leading us to an overwhelming victory. With our alliance now proven effective, we're now making a move on the Empire's floating fortress base in the North Atlantic, and this is another mission where we're paired up with the Soviet co-commander, this time Dasha. To begin, we need to protect this salvage ship gathering up intel from a crashed Imperial boat. We're given a force of 4 hydrofoils and 4 dolphins. Since, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm counting dolphins as infantry, and yes, I will fight you on that, we can use them to destroy the hydrofoils. Be a bit careful here, as I found that if a dolphin was in the way of another one's attacks, they would also take damage from the friendly fire. Once they're gone, send your dolphins to assist the Soviets in getting rid of the Empire coming to interrupt the salvage operation. We can deal with the ships that come at us, but without those hydrofoils, we're completely reliant on the Soviets' bullfrogs dealing with the aircraft, so if they all die, just restart unless there's only a few seconds left on the timer. It's really just luck whether or not you'll get through this segment, but it can't be too bad because I got it done on my second try. We now have to take out some spotter ships to knock out the island fortress's long-range defenses so that we can move our base in. The first half of this sees us with a group of 4 spies that we need to use to infiltrate power plants, temporarily knocking down the defenses so that Natasha can get in to call in an airstrike, knocking them out for good. Natasha, you know that our spy never left that building, right? Continue making your way around the island, knocking out power plants, and once they're all gone, Natasha can get in to take out the spotter ship. We now swap over to see what Tanya's up to, and this is basically the inverse of the last situation. We need to use Tanya to clear out groups of enemies so that our co-commander's engineers can infiltrate the generators. Each one they take knocks out the power to the defenses protecting the next one, and once they're all gone, we have a clear path to blow up the second spotter ship. Now the real mission can begin. To take down the floating fortress, we just need to infiltrate the 2 power cores with engineers to overload them. Problem is that we have to do this in quick succession. If we take one but then dilly-dally getting the other, then the first one will revert back out of our control. An even bigger problem is that our base is stuck on the water, where we can't build a barracks, and so we can't train an engineer. In the Soviets' run, we got around this by building near to our co-commander's base, but this time Dash is set up on the water as well, meaning that our only way to build a base on land is with a base extension vehicle. These aren't infantry, but are allowed in the rules, and even if they weren't, the Allied base extension vehicle is just the transformed form of the Prospector, which is also an allowed vehicle, making this doubly allowed. Take a Prospector and send it over to this island to have it unpack, and make sure to build another Prospector for the refinery you took this one from. While that's happening, build a couple of power plants and some multi-gunner turrets around our water base. Also, start to build an airbase, and the second you can, place this down on our new land base. You might wonder why we would build this, but don't worry, I'll explain later, just be patient. Also build some more turrets around your land base and a barracks. Pump out around 10 engineers and a bunch of javelins. We only need 2 to capture the cores, but it's good to have some redundancy, plus you'll want to capture some of the oil rigs around the area and the abandoned power plants to increase our power on the cheap. You'll also want to start getting both heightened and max clearance on your command hub so that you can build the newly added sentry bombers. These things are the best the Allied Air Force has, able to carpet bomb most structures into oblivion. You might think that these things are definitely not infantry, and you'd be right, so we definitely can't use them for their bombing capabilities. But we can use them for their transport capabilities. Yep, these things can hold and parachute 5 units each. Now, aside from being just generally the best way to transport units around in my opinion, there's also another reason why I went with the sentry bomber over the Allies' other transport. You see, most units have a tendency to idly fire at any enemies that get in their range. This is generally a good thing since you don't want your forces being killed off while they wait for you to inform them that yes, it's okay to shoot at the people shooting at them, but in the case of transports that have weaponry, it makes it a lot harder to use them as transports and have them not do damage. The sentry bomber though, as well as I'm pretty sure every other bombing aircraft in the game, won't drop bombs on a target unless specifically ordered to, making idle damage a completely non-issue with these things. We're going to be filling them with little teams that we're going to drop into the cores to capture them. The sentry bombers take a while to build though and are quite expensive, and the same thing goes for the max clearance. You need to be able to build these things in the first place, so this could take a minute. While you're building your strike teams, you should also be doing some damage to these base defenses around the power cores with commander abilities. I haven't really mentioned these up until this point, as honestly they haven't really been all too game changing, but I use them quite a bit here, so this is probably a good time to list the useful ones off. Cryoblast is a beam that can freeze units or with higher levels structures in an area which on its own I don't find to be too useful, but since I'm pretty sure frozen structures take more damage, you can use it on a building before using a damaging commander ability to get some more bang for your buck. Then you've got Surgical Strike, which is kind of the allied equivalent to the Soviets' orbital dump, just way lamer. A bomber comes in and drops a bomb. It deals pretty good damage, but I don't know, it just never feels like it's doing as much as the orbital dump, not to mention that it doesn't have any upgraded versions. Time Bomb is probably the one I find to be most useful. A bomb gets teleported in and after a countdown, kaboom. It can get destroyed by enemies, but it still does damage. It also has an upgraded version, but we don't have access to those yet. I got a little use out of Surveillance Sweep, Free Trade and Paratrooper teams, but those ones were mostly afterthoughts. Once my strike teams and transports were built and the base defenses sufficiently softened up, the attack could commence. I loaded 4 javelins and 1 engineer onto each sentry. I then sent the sentries over to the power cores, and once it reached the first one, I dropped the teams in, who faced a little resistance but were able to capture it. The countdown now begins to capture the other, so follow the sentries over to the other core. This one went down even easier, and once my engineer was in the building, the fate of the floating fortress was sealed. It seems like when we work together, there's nothing that the Soviets and the Allies can't achieve. If this keeps up, once we deal with the Empire, there might be no need to go back to all that fighting. The Premier even contacts us with what I can only assume to be glowing praise.
We won't stand for this treachery, Bingham. Do you hear me? My advisors warned me against trusting you, allies.
Sorry, treachery?
Huh. Guess not. Wonder what that was all about. Well, as it turns out, President Klaus was really not fond of our alliance, and so has decided to take matters into his own hands by using a secret weapons facility at Mount Rushmore to blow up our alliance. Oh, yeah, in Moscow. We can't let that happen, so we need to destroy the nearby comm tower to stop the launch signal from being sent. We start off with just Tanya for this mission, with our co-commander having 3 spies and 3 engineers. This part is pretty simple. We need to take out the comm tower, but there's a base defense making that hard, so we need to clear out the attack dogs around this generator so our co-commander's spies' disguises don't get broken when they infiltrate it. With the defenses temporarily taken out, move Tanya in to permanently destroy the power plant and the rest of the base around it. You can now move her in to take out the comm tower. Of course, it can't be that easy though, and now the president appears in his limo, contacting us to say that he's on his way to the site to manually launch the weapon, meaning that we have no other option than to destroy the launch facility itself before we can get there. Problem is, it's in the middle of a heavily defended base, and we're on a timer here. You might ask why not just pull a Lee Harvey Oswald and assassinate the president, and well, 2 reasons. 1, this isn't an open-top car, and 2, the president has a dead man switch set up so that if his heart stops beating, the weapon will fire regardless. Now, this to me doesn't make sense for a few reasons, but I'll talk about the big one in part 3, since it involves story spoilers for this heavily story-focused 16-year-old video game. We can still slow the president down though with the use of cryoshock to freeze his limo in place for a short time. This is also that mission earlier I said that cryocopters are useful in, since they can also freeze the president theoretically permanently, but obviously that doesn't affect us here. You might be tempted to spec into the second level of cryoshock, cryoblast, but I wouldn't, as from my understanding it doesn't actually make whatever's frozen stay frozen longer. Rather, it just increases the radius of the area that gets frozen. I'd recommend making a save once the second part of the mission begins, as you'll probably fail a good few times, and it sucks to have to replay the start every single time. For your base, you'll want ore refineries on all of the 3 nearby mines, as well as a lot of base defenses and the power to power them, and of course you'll also need a barracks. Now, how are we actually going to take out that launch facility? Well, my first thought was the obvious: build up a big army and hit it until it dies, but with how well defended this base is, to build up a sizable enough force for this strat to work, we'd need more time than we have, so that idea's out. I tried ordering my co-commander to attack it since they have access to Vindicator and Sentry bombers, which in large enough numbers could easily destroy it, but that relies on their AI both building enough of these and actually using them when I order them to, and more often than not, Warren prefers sending individual tanks to go solo the base, which, surprise, doesn't work. I was really stumped here, but luckily I was doing this mission around the time that I posted my first Red Alert vid. To my surprise, a couple people in that one mentioned that the spy should make the Allied campaign easier, or at the very least were singing the spy's praises. I found that weird since honestly I never really found spies all that useful, only ever using the ones given to me in missions that they were required in. It's definitely because they don't have any weapons. It made my dumb brain go, oh, how are they gonna deal damage, and then never use them. And yes, I am the kind of person who doesn't put status moves on my Pokemon. Reading these comments, I decided to give the spy a go in this mission, and holy heck have I changed my tune on these dudes, because without them, I doubt I would have been able to finish this mission even if I turned the difficulty down. Behind the main heavily guarded enemy base here, there's a sort of secondary one that supplies them power, and by sneaking some spies up here, we can have them infiltrate and knock out the power whenever we want. Now, we just need to build up a large force of javelins. While we build up our force, we'll also be given a group of Mirage tanks, whose camouflage ability would be quite helpful in this mission, but alas, we need to destroy them. You'll not want to spend too long building up your army, as the closer the President gets to the launch site, the more of the Rushmore heads will activate, each one making it harder to get to the base. Once you're happy with your force, wait for a good moment, then move them into the enemy base, sending a spy into the power plant just before they get into range of the defences. You want to have another spy infiltrate another power plant just before the first one reactivates, so your forces never have to go up against the base defences here. Hopefully your force should be able to destroy the facility without too much trouble. With that done, we're now free to take out the President. I asked my co-commander to do this since my force had already done most of the work and they were easily able to handle it. So long, President Omni-Man. Thankfully, the Russians are chill with that whole almost wiped Moscow off the map thing, so our alliance can continue. Time to deal with the Empire once and for all. Tanya informs us that all of the Imperial commanders are meeting in Tokyo, which will give us a perfect chance to deal a finishing blow to them. For the first part of this mission, we're given an insane base, like properly insane. We got 2 barracks, 2 garages, 2 air bases, a seaport, and a ton of power plants. Damn, this is a lot. So sell all of that. Well, not all of it. For now, just sell the garages and the air bases. You can also start training 10 javelins and 10 peacekeepers, and once they're done cooking, sell your barracks, as well as selling whatever power plants you don't need to supply your base. Pretty quickly, the Empire will try to build a counter base right in front of ours, so move your soldiers in to start destroying their structures before they get a chance to get operational. You can build some base defenses to help out, but it's not really necessary if you know what you're doing. You'll also want to start pumping out a boatload of dolphins. Now, it's kind of just a waiting game. The Soviets have been held up, and we just need to hold out until they arrive. You can try to complete the bonus objective of destroying the Empire's blockade, but you can only really do chip damage with commander abilities and ordering your co-commander to attack, so you probably won't be able to get all of this done before the time's up. The entire time we're waiting for the Soviets, they keep contacting us to assure us that they'll be here soon, but of course once the timer runs out, General Krukov contacts us to say that they've been held up and won't be able to make it, so damn, guess we're on our own for this one. Just before the timer ticked down fully, I sold every other structure I had and moved all of my units as far away from the remaining construction yard as I could. I did this because now the Empire reveals their true power by blowing up our base with one of their super weapons, destroying everything except for our construction yard, which just barely survives. This is why it's best to just sell off your base at the start, better having it as money in the bank than a bunch of useless rubble. All of our infantry survived the attack too, though even with them being well out of the blast radius, the game still dropped their health down to half, which kind of sucks. Immediately, you'll want to send your dolphins over to the right corner of the map and have them destroy the Imperial docks here. This is an objective for later in the mission, and trust me, handling it now makes things a lot easier on you later. Once these are destroyed, you can send your dolphins up here to take out the other Imperial naval yards, but at this point they've mostly served their purpose, so it's not too big of a deal if they die off. I would recommend making a save around here though, as things are about to get pretty brutal, and it would be nice to not have to replay the whole starting section again. Now, about that base situation, things are pretty grim. We have no base left and very little funds to rebuild with. Start to build an ore refinery. You'll likely run out of funds before this is done, but don't worry, you'll soon be given a large transfer of funds to help get you back on your feet. Once the refinery is ready, place it down here. Now, we're going to want to move our construction yard. Luckily, we've been gifted a chronosphere, which is an allied structure that lets us teleport forces across the map. This will kill any infantry when used on them, making it not very useful for its intended purposes, but we can still find a use for it in this mission. Order your co-commander to move her base using the chronosphere, then pack up your MCV and follow her over to the new location. You should start repairing your construction yard, and you'll want some more power plants, refineries, and of course a barracks. You'll also want lots of defenses, as there's an Imperial base very nearby, and they'll basically be constantly sending forces up against you, chipping away at your base from here. We're also given some reinforcements in the form of Mirage tanks, multi-gunners, and the new long-ranged Athena cannons, none of which we can use, so have your remaining forces back at the starting island, blow them all to pieces. Okay, so now we're starting to get our footing again, but we have quite a few bases to wipe out, and the longer we wait, the worse the situation will get, so we've got to act quick. First, we're going to want to take out the Empire's superweapon, since if they get a chance to fire it again, it's basically game over. While you build up your army of javelins, you should be using commander abilities to do as much chip damage to these things as possible. When you do send in your javelins, they'll first have to deal with some defenses, and when they get close enough to deal damage, the superweapon will pull out its everything-proof shield, but once this fades, getting rid of these things is pretty easy. Don't get too cocky though, as this is a mission that can really go south at any point, so I'd recommend making another save here, as well as after completing any of the objectives. Your next target should be the Imperial Grand Dojo just across from our base. It's probably the next greatest threat to us now that the superweapons are gone. Since most of my forces were lost after taking out the superweapon, I had to train up a new army, this time including some peacekeepers to help deal with all the infantry in the next base. While I was training these dudes up, the Empire received reinforcements in the form of an elite naval fleet, as if I didn't have enough to worry about. We don't have much that we can do to deal damage to these, to be honest, but luckily we don't really have to. See, despite the Chronosphere not really being great for its intended purpose in this run, we can turn it into a pretty useful weapon against the Empire. By using this on the Empire's fleet, we can teleport them onto dry land, immediately causing them all to be destroyed. This works in reverse as well, when teleporting units not meant to be on water. We can't get the entire fleet with one Chronosphere, but with a little luck you can get all of the Shogun battleships, which are the only ones that really pose a threat to us, allowing us to casually clean up the rest of the navy in our own time. Once I was happy with my army, I marched them down into the Grand Dojo. This was a hard-fought battle, even once the defenses were destroyed. You'll have to constantly divert attention away from the dojos to deal with the enemy units. I especially made sure to quickly deal with any Imperial warriors and shinobi I saw, since they both have the capacity to one-hit my infantry, and if left unattended, they can do some serious damage quickly. But with my overwhelming firepower, I was able to destroy the base here. With this gone, the mission gets a lot less stressful, as our base is no longer under basically constant attack. I still had a pretty good force after the base was knocked out, so I decided to only reinforce them a little before sending them in to take out the Imperial Military HQ in the top left corner. This one was quite hard, even with destroying the generators with commander abilities to drop the base defenses. I kept losing my forces thanks to poor commanding and had to load a save. Eventually though, I was able to take out all of the defenses and the units here, then break through the walls, giving me a safe path to get inside and take out the HQ. Now, all that's left is the Imperial Robotics Lab, which I left till last since it's on an island isolated from our base, making it hard to get our forces to. I originally was just going to order my co-commander to deal with it and help out with commander abilities, but that was going to take a long time. So instead, I used commander abilities to knock out the power to the defenses, then made an airbase and some sentries, which took ages since I was running very low on funds at this point. I loaded some javelins up, then dropped them over onto the robotics lab, and despite them taking some casualties, just this small force was enough to take out the base, dealing the final blow to the Empire. Damn, that was an intense one. There is so much you need to focus on in this one, and I had to reload and restart so many times to get through it. I'm honestly kind of surprised I managed to get through it on hard, is what I would say if I had gotten through it on hard. Yeah, looking back at my footage while scripting this vid, I realized that I never turned the difficulty up for this one. That surprised me, since I have a distinct memory of restarting this one just to increase the difficulty, but I guess my mind's playing tricks on me. I genuinely thought I'd gotten through this entire campaign on hard, and the realization almost a full week later that I actually didn't was really deflating. Looking back at it though, if this gave me this much trouble on medium, then I don't think I could have managed it on hard, and would have probably had to have turned it down regardless. So that's it, the Empire's defeated and the war is over. No thanks to those Soviets though, they better have a damn good excuse for hanging us out to dry like that. Well, yeah, it actually turns out that they do. See, they were busy betraying us. Yeah, so we're contacted by a Russian scientist, raving about the time-space continuum or some nonsense, but he also informs us that the Soviets are preparing an attack on us using Cuba as a staging ground. Before we can make any serious moves, we've got to figure out what the hell's going on here, so we're being sent in to gather some intel, making sure to click over to hard this time. We start this mission out with just a team of spies and dogs, who we need to keep undetected using the camouflage of our co-commander's Mirage tank. This mission is the first time that we're going to make use of the spy's special ability. They can spend 1,000 credits to bribe any enemy units within a short range over to our side. Now, usually I find it more effective to just buy my own units than bribing enemies, hence why I haven't really used this ability yet, but for this part it's basically required. Do be a little bit careful with who and where you bribe, as we only have enough money for 5 bribes and we don't want to waste them, especially on a tank by accident. You'll also want to have only one spy selected when you use the bribe, or both will spend the money, which I didn't realize, leading me only to being able to use 3 bribes. In the end, my little ragtag team team of Soviet defectors included 2 Tesla troopers and 4 flak troopers, one of which got squished by a tank. Yeah, not the best team, but it's enough to get the job done. I cleared a path leading to the Soviets' base, and with our suspicions of treachery confirmed, we leveled the place. Turns out though, we're too late, and the Soviets' plan is being put into motion. They've placed Kirovs armed with massive bombs into sports arenas on the island, and each one is heading for a different major allied city. If even one escapes, the consequences will be disastrous, so we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Our co-commander will mostly focus on dealing with the Kirovs as they appear, meaning that it's up to us to destroy the arenas before more can get airborne. As the mission goes on, more arenas will become active, and if you're not keeping up control of the situation, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. We actually passed one of these arenas on the way, and thinking ahead, I tried to use friendly fire on it to destroy it, or at least damage it early, but sadly, it's immune to damage until the big reveal. Order your co-commander to attack the one Kirov already in the air, and continue doing this with all the ones that appear to keep their numbers down. Some of them will fly directly over our base, so we can deal with those ones on our own. Quickly build a barracks and some defenses, and start pumping out as many javelins as you can. Once you've got about 20-ish, move them towards the closest arena, the soccer stadium. I lost most of this force, but with the 3 that were remaining, I was able to take out the first stadium, though at that point 2 more had come online, and that last one came online shortly after. See what I mean when I say it's easy for the situation to get out of hand here? My second target was the boxing stadium in the middle of the map. My first attempt at this one with the force from the soccer stadium and their reinforcements went poorly, being taken out by a Soviet force patrolling the area, but my second attack, despite being with a much smaller army, was much more successful, probably just because the Soviets patrolling just happened to not be there at the time. That's kind of it for the easy stadiums to take out, as the 3 remaining ones are in much more fortified positions. The one just across the water from our base is especially annoying since we can't actually move our infantry across to it. I'd recommend using your commander abilities to soften this one up while you deal with the rest of them. It was around this point as well that my base came under attack from some Apocalypse tanks, and I had no units to fend them off, leading to them doing some pretty serious damage while I built up an army to take them out. Great, if I didn't already have enough to deal with, now I gotta worry about my base being attacked. Once I had enough javelins, I moved them towards the first stadium we saw launch a Kirov. While my force was taking out this one, this Kirov got super close to escaping the area, leading to Bingham chewing us out. No clue why you're blaming me, dude. It's Giles' job to take care of the Kirov. Seriously, dude, what's the matter with you? Well, it turns out the matter with him is that his entire army and base are being destroyed. Yeah, thanks to needing to focus on destroying the Kirovs, he can't really focus on base defense, and since his base is at sea, there's not much we can do to help him, meaning that there's a good chance that he'll be wiped out, leaving the full task of destroying the Kirovs and the arenas to us. Luckily, the 2 remaining stadiums send Kirovs over the area where we can deal with them with our javelins, but if they get out of range, it might as well be game over. I reinforced my army and moved them into the last remaining arena on the main island. The base defenses here can rack up heavy casualties if you're not careful, but as long as you clear them out, as well as any enemy units that pose a threat to us, then this one can be taken out pretty easy. With the last one, I was going to spam commander abilities to destroy it, but that was taking too long, so I decided to build an airfield and get the upgrades necessary to start building sentries and use them to drop off some javelins right behind the arena, which quickly fell since there wasn't really much here to defend it. Now, just one more Kirov to take out, which I actually got worried might escape for a second, but luckily I was able to take it out by the skin of my teeth. Whew, that one was stressful, but surprisingly, with how much can go wrong in that mission, it wasn't actually all that hard. I didn't have to restart or even reload a save once. Anyway, with all that Dr. Zelensky said turning out to be true, we have no choice but to put a stop to the Soviets. General Krukov and the Premier have taken up refuge in Leningrad, concentrating the last of their forces there to secure the place, giving us an opportunity to put an end to these treacherous scoundrels once and for all. To begin this mission, we need to get our MCVs into place to start a base up, and to do this they've been shrunken down. This makes them much faster, but also vulnerable to being crushed by enemy armor, so we need to be careful while moving them through. Once unpacked, we have to clear the area, and to do so we're given a group of Mirage tanks. Our ally also gets some of these, however they seem to lose them very quickly, giving me seemingly no other choice than to use my own to clear the area. This is another situation, like in Mission 3 with the hydrofoils, where yes, by the rules as I set them out at the start, this is technically okay, but it still just doesn't feel right. Luckily though, thanks to a commenter, I was able to figure out a bit of a strategy to mitigate the damage here a little. Master Collis, in reference to this part of my Soviet run, points out that I could transform my construction yard into its MCV form and use it to crush the smaller tanks. Now, I poo-pooed this idea since it feels a little bit against the spirit to use the MCV in this way, but in this case we're going to have to use a vehicle to clear the area either way, so we might as well use one slightly more legal in this run. We can crush everything here, but obviously the structures are all out of the question, so we're still going to need to use the Mirage tanks, but at least we minimized how much we need to use them for. Once the area is clear, Premier Chedenko contacts us to tell us that he's sending the full force of the Soviet Union against us, and of course we get this classic line.
I won't let you have the satisfaction of catching me. I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
God, I love this game. I also like this mission since it gives a lot of context to why the Premier was so dead set on protecting Leningrad's castle back in the first mission of the Soviets campaign. We have to destroy the Premier's rocket before he can launch himself into space. Problem is, it's currently immune to damage thanks to the many iron curtains in the area, so we have to destroy them all first before we can take out the rocket. And we only have 20 minutes to do it, so better act quick. This is another one where I'd recommend making a save just about every time something goes right for you, since chances are you're just seconds away from everything crashing down around you. You'll want to build up all the basics of your base pretty quickly so that you can get some defenses up and start pumping out javelins. You'll also want an airbase so that you can build a Bureau of Defense, which will allow you to later build the allied superweapon, the Proton Collider, which will be a big help later on. You should also spec into max clearance as soon as you can. While you're working on that, order your co-commander to start taking out the barracks around the Iron Curtain to the left middle. Once they're done with that, have Warren destroy the super reactors near the Iron Curtain on the bottom left, which will also destroy most of the base, making the Soviets less able to attack and defend on this side. You can then have them take out the Iron Curtains here, as well as the one a little further back. All this time, I was also using my commander abilities on the Iron Curtain all the way at the back since it's by far the hardest to reach. I'd used up about half of my time at this point and still had a little over half of the objectives remaining, so it's probably about time that I got a little bit more active in the battle. My Proton Collider was ready to use, so I used it to soften up the Iron Curtain on the back right. Unfortunately though, it wasn't enough to completely destroy it. I then moved in my javelins, who thanks to the constant attacks by the nearby Soviet armor weren't as numerous as I would have liked, but still had enough firepower to destroy the closest Iron Curtain. As if 3 objectives in 8 minutes wasn't rough enough, General Krukov now decides to make its presence known, bringing out the Soviets' own superweapon, the Vacuum Imploder. Destroying this is an optional mission, and despite how scary it may seem, I don't think it actually has the time to load up a shot at this point, so just ignore it and continue with the Iron Curtains. I moved my remaining javelins up to the next Iron Curtain, which is surrounded by garrison buildings. With so little time remaining, we can't really waste it clearing all these out, so just clear enough so that your troops can get in range of the Iron Curtain to take it out. The last of my force was taken out here though, so luckily I'm basically always training new javelins in these missions. I also made some sentry bombers and brought Tanya out and boarded her onto one of these, but that won't be important until later. I figured I've taken out enough Iron Curtains now, so I asked Warren to handle the one on the right back, but thanks to all the anti-air here, his Vindicators were shot down before they could do anything. Luckily, their corpses falling from the sky still dealt damage to the Iron Curtain, enough that a time bomb could take it out. I also got Warren to fire his Proton Collider at the one in the back, which actually destroyed it thanks to how many commander abilities I'd used on it at this point. That's all of the Iron Curtains down, but with only 5 minutes left in my base under an attack that I can't fend off, surely this is over, right? Wait, I have a Proton Collider shot loaded. Maybe, just maybe it'll be enough to take out the rocket. Damn, it wasn't enough. But it took out all the forces around the castle. If I can get Tanya in safely, she might be able to infiltrate and destroy it from the inside. So I sent out my sentry bombers, and by some miracle the one carrying Tanya survived the MiG fighters on their tail and dropped her in. As I hear the sounds of my base being destroyed, she infiltrates the building and brings it down from the inside, narrowly claiming victory once and for all over the Reds. In reality, I had to reload like 20 times to get a run where the sentry carrying Tanya wasn't shot down on the way, but shh, we don't talk about that. With the Soviets defeated, statues of Lenin are torn down in the street, because capitalism, I guess. Premier Zhdanko and General Krukov are obviously thrown into a cryo-prison for their crimes, and the Dorito dust-covered gamers playing this get to experience something even less realistic for them than the rest of this adventure: the attention of a woman. So, can you beat Command & Conquer Red Alert 3 Infantry only? Well, I was a little torn, thanks to those parts in the third and final mission where we were forced to use vehicles. Even though I did have a carve-out in the rules for this exact situation, it still doesn't feel like a true infantry-only challenge when we had to use vehicles in a direct combat role. I think in the end though, I've settled on calling this a victory, if just a slightly softer one than in my last run. I really enjoyed playing this campaign. The Allies is probably my least favourite of the 3 campaigns in this game, but playing it for this run I had a blast, and it really felt like I got to experience it with new eyes. If you enjoyed, why not consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. YouTube decided to barely push my last vid, so it flopped hard compared to my previous 3 uploads, and when I only upload once every 3 weeks, having a flop is a really gutting experience, especially one I work so hard on, so I'd really appreciate it if you could help out and get this one a little bit more noticed. In any case, shameless promotion out of the way, really, thanks for watching. I've been Katie Cat, and I'll see you next time. Through the walls, giving me a safe path inside to take out the HQ.